If something this powerful is dying, maybe it was never meant to be saved. The thought came uninvited, sharp and cold. As Elena Whitmore stood at the edge of the forest line, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the scent of rain still hanging in the air like a held breath. The wind moved through the trees in low whispers, bending branches just enough to make them creak, as if the woods themselves were warning her to turn back, to leave whatever lay ahead untouched. She didn't listen. She couldn't, because beneath the hush of leaves and distant thunder, there was something else, faint, uneven, but unmistakable. Breathing. Not the steady rhythm of a resting animal, but something fragile, strained, fighting to hold on. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of her worn cloak as she stepped forward, one cautious foot at a time, each movement deliberate, as though the ground might give way beneath her if she moved too quickly. She had learned long ago how to move quietly, how to take up as little space as possible. It was the only way to survive when the world had already decided you didn't belong in it. The trees parted just enough to reveal a small clearing, and that's when she saw it. At first, it didn't look real. Too large. Too still. A massive wolf lay stretched across the cold ground, its body partially turned toward her, silver-gray fur dulled by dirt and rain, its chest rising just barely with each shallow breath. Even from a distance of 10, maybe 15 feet, she could feel something about it, something heavy, like the air itself had weight. This wasn't just any wolf. Every instinct she had told her that, and every instinct told her to leave. Wolves like this didn't belong to the edges of the territory. They belonged to power, to dominance, to the kind of world that had no place for someone like her. Elena swallowed, her throat dry despite the damp air, and took another step forward anyway. Her heart beat faster, not from fear alone, but from something deeper, something she had never quite been able to silence. The same quiet pull that had always made her stop when others walked away. The same instinct that had gotten her in trouble more times than she could count. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if she meant herself or the creature before her. The wolf didn't move. Its eyes remained closed, its body still except for that fragile rise and fall. She moved closer, slowly, until she was just a few feet away, close enough to see the subtle details. The way its fur shifted with each breath, the tension in its limbs, even in stillness, the quiet strength that lingered beneath the weakness. It didn't feel like something broken. It felt like something restrained. Elena hesitated, her hand hovering in the air, inches from the wolf's side. If anyone from the pack saw her now, they would laugh, or worse, they would remind her exactly what she was, an omega, the lowest of the low, someone who had no right to interfere with anything beyond her place. She could already hear their voices, sharp and dismissive, telling her to walk away, to let nature take its course, that it wasn't her responsibility, that nothing here belonged to her. Her fingers trembled slightly, suspended between choice and consequence. She knew what walking away looked like. She had lived it. She had felt it. And she had promised herself, in the quiet corners of her own thoughts, that she would never become the kind of person who could ignore something in pain just because it was easier. Elena exhaled slowly, steadying her breath, and lowered her hand the rest of the way. Her fingertips brushed against the wolf's fur, warm despite the cold air, and in that instant, everything else, the whispers, the warnings, the memory of every time she had been told to stay in her place, fell away. Because whatever this was, whoever this creature belonged to, it was still breathing. And that was enough. The warmth did not fade when Elena pulled her hand back. It lingered in her fingertips, subtle but undeniable, like the echo of something that did not belong to her. She frowned slightly, glancing down at her own hand as if expecting to see something different, but there was nothing there, just pale skin and faint dirt from the forest floor. Still, the sensation remained, steady and quiet, spreading up her wrist, in a way that made her chest tighten. That was not normal. Omegas did not feel things like that. Omegas did not carry anything that felt like strength. She looked back at the wolf, her gaze narrowing just a fraction as she studied it more closely. The rise and fall of its chest seemed a little stronger now, not by much, but enough that she noticed. Enough that it made her hesitate. Elena shifted her weight, lowering herself slowly to her knees beside it, the damp ground seeping through the fabric of her dress. She did not rush. She never rushed. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as though she was approaching something sacred instead of something dangerous. Her eyes traced along the length of the wolf's body, taking in the details she had missed before. The size alone was enough to unsettle her. Even lying still, it felt immense, easily larger than any wolf she had ever seen within her pack, its presence filling the small clearing in a way that made the air feel tighter, heavier. This was not just power. This was something older, something that did not need to prove itself to be known. "What are you?" she whispered, the words barely louder than the wind moving through the trees. The wolf did not answer, of course, but something about it made the silence feel like it was listening. Elena drew in a slow breath, steadying herself, and reached out again, this time placing her palm more firmly against its side. The warmth returned instantly, stronger now, flowing through her hand in a quiet, steady pulse. She felt it before she saw it. The shallow rhythm beneath her palm began to change, growing more even, more grounded, as if something inside the wolf was responding to her touch. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she forgot to move, forgot to think. She had spent her entire life being told she was nothing, that whatever small gift she carried was insignificant, barely worth acknowledging. Something meant for soothing restless children or calming frightened animals, nothing more. But this did not feel small. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unseen, something that had been waiting, silent, for the right moment to awaken. Elena swallowed, her throat tightening as doubt crept in around the edges of that feeling. This was dangerous, not just because of the wolf, but because of what it meant. If anyone saw this, if anyone understood what was happening, she would not just be mocked. She would be feared, and fear, in her world, never ended kindly. Her fingers pressed slightly into the thick fur, grounding herself in the present, in the simple fact that there was something here that needed help, that had always been enough for her before. It had to be enough now. A soft sound broke the stillness, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. A shift in breath, a subtle movement beneath her hand. Elena froze, her entire body going still as her senses sharpened all at once. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her gaze toward the wolf's face. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then, almost imperceptibly, its chest rose deeper than before. The air in the clearing seemed to still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Elena's pulse quickened, a quiet tension building in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite something else. She did not pull her hand away. She could not. Because whatever this was, whatever she had just touched, it was no longer fading. It was waking. The moment it happened, Elena knew there was no turning back. The wolf's breathing deepened beneath her palm, no longer fragile or fading, but steady, deliberate, as if something powerful had simply been waiting for permission to return. Her fingers stiffened slightly against its fur, her entire body going still as a quiet awareness settled over her. This was no longer a creature on the edge of collapse. This was something rising. Slowly, the wolf's head shifted, just an inch at first, then more, the movement controlled, intentional, nothing like the weak stillness from before. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she watched, unable to look away. Her instincts told her to move, to create distance, but something stronger held her in place, something rooted deep inside her chest that refused to abandon what she had just helped bring back. The wolf's ears twitched, responding to sounds she could not hear, and then, with a quiet exhale that seemed to carry weight through the clearing, its eyes opened. Elena felt it before she fully saw it. That shift in the air, that subtle pressure that made her heart stutter once in her chest. When her gaze locked onto its eyes, everything else seemed to fade. They were not the dull, fading eyes of a dying animal. They were clear, focused, and unmistakably aware. A pale, striking silver that caught what little light filtered through the trees and held it, reflecting it back with a depth that felt far too human to ignore. Elena's hand remained where it was, though every muscle in her body tightened, her pulse quickening in response to that gaze. This was not confusion. This was not instinct. This was recognition, and it was looking directly at her. "You are awake," she whispered, her voice softer than she intended, as if speaking any louder might break whatever fragile moment existed between them. The wolf did not move away. It did not growl, did not bare its teeth, did not react the way any creature of that size and strength should when faced with a stranger so close. Instead, it held her gaze, unblinking, as if studying her with the same quiet intensity she felt pressing against her. Elena swallowed, her throat tightening as a strange awareness crept in around the edges of her thoughts. It felt like standing too close to something vast, something that did not need to move to be understood as powerful. Her hand began to lower slowly, instinct finally beginning to surface beneath the weight of that stare, but before she could pull away completely, the wolf shifted again. Not sudden, not aggressive, but enough to make her freeze mid-motion. Its head lifted higher, its body adjusting with a controlled strength that no longer hinted at weakness. The space between them seemed to shrink, though neither of them had truly moved closer. Elena's breath came slower now, measured, as if her body was trying to keep pace with something it did not fully understand. "I did not mean to intrude," she said quietly, the words instinctive, offered more out of respect than fear. Because fear did not quite fit what she was feeling. Not entirely. There was something else there. Something steadier. The wolf's gaze did not soften, but it did change, just slightly, as if something behind those silver eyes had shifted in response to her voice. The silence stretched, thick and charged, until Elena became aware of something else. A subtle warmth, different from before, not just in her hand now, but in her chest, spreading slowly outward, as though whatever connection had sparked when she touched it had not fully faded. It pulsed once, quiet but undeniable, and for a brief second, her thoughts stilled completely. The wolf inhaled deeply, its chest expanding with a strength that no longer seemed borrowed, and as it exhaled, Elena felt the shift in the air again, stronger this time, carrying something she could not name but could not ignore. This was no ordinary creature, and somehow, impossibly, it had not pushed her away. It had not rejected her presence. It had allowed it. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her side, grounding herself as the realization settled in, slow and heavy. Whatever she had just stepped into, whatever she had just awakened, was far beyond anything her quiet, overlooked life had ever prepared her for. And yet, as those silver eyes remained fixed on hers, she understood one thing with a certainty that left no room for doubt. This moment mattered, not just for the creature before her, but for her. Because for the first time in her life, something powerful was not looking through her as if she did not exist. It was looking directly at her, and it was choosing not to turn away. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It pressed in around Elena, thick and deliberate, as if the forest itself had stepped back to make room for whatever was unfolding between her and the creature before her. She became aware of every small detail at once. The faint rustle of leaves high above, the distant echo of water moving somewhere unseen, the steady rhythm of her own breath that suddenly felt too loud in the quiet. But beneath all of that, there was something else now. A presence. Not just the wolf's physical form, but something deeper, something that reached beyond what her eyes could see. The wolf shifted again, this time pushing itself up. Slightly, its massive frame adjusting with a controlled strength that made Elena instinctively lean back an inch, her balance shifting on her knees. It was not a sudden movement, but it carried weight, the kind that did not need speed to command attention. Its front legs braced against the ground, muscles tightening beneath thick fur, and as it lifted itself higher, the full scale of it became impossible to ignore. Standing, it would easily tower over her. Even now, partially raised, it felt like something that did not belong to the same world she did. Elena's breath slowed, her chest rising and falling in careful rhythm as she watched. There was no weakness left in the way it held itself. No hesitation. Whatever fragile state it had been in moments ago had vanished, replaced by something steady and fully present. Her fingers curled lightly into the fabric of her dress, grounding herself as the realization settled in deeper. She had not just helped it survive. She had helped it return. The wolf's gaze never left her. Those silver eyes tracked her every subtle movement, not with suspicion, but with a kind of focus that made her pulse quicken in a different way now. It was not the fear of being attacked. It was the awareness of being seen. Completely. As if whatever stood before her could read more than just her presence. Could sense the quiet determination that had brought her here, the part of her that had refused to walk away even when every voice she had ever known would have told her to. Elena swallowed, her throat tightening slightly as she shifted her weight again, slowly rising from her knees to stand. The motion felt deliberate, respectful, as though she were careful not to break an unspoken boundary between them. She kept her hands visible at her sides, her posture open, steady, even as her heart continued its quiet, persistent rhythm against her ribs. "You are not from here," she said softly, the words leaving her before she could stop them, drawn from the certainty that had been building inside her since the moment she first saw him. It was not a question. The wolf's ears flicked slightly at the sound of her voice, and for a brief moment, the air seemed to tighten again, as if her words had brushed against something significant. Elena held her ground, even as a faint unease crept in at the edges of her thoughts. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. The kind that came when something familiar shifted just enough to reveal it had never been familiar at all. A breeze moved through the clearing, lifting a few strands of her hair across her face, and as she brushed them back, she felt it again. That warmth, stronger this time. It spread through her chest in a slow, steady pulse, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Her breath caught slightly, and she pressed her lips together, trying to steady herself against a sensation she could not explain. It felt like recognition, not from her, but from something else, something connected to the creature before her. The wolf took a step forward, just one, controlled, measured, but enough to close the space between them by a few feet. Elena's body responded instantly, her muscles tightening, her breath pausing for a fraction of a second. But she did not step back. She could have. Every instinct told her she should. But something stronger held her in place. Something that felt less like a choice and more like a quiet understanding forming beneath the surface. The wolf stopped again, now close enough that she could see the finer details in its eyes, the depth of that silver gaze, the way it held her without wavering. There was no aggression in it. No threat. Only presence. Elena's heartbeat slowed, not because the tension had lessened, but because it had changed, shifted into something steadier, something that felt almost certain. She exhaled softly, her shoulders easing just slightly as she met that gaze without looking away. And in that quiet, suspended moment, with the world holding its breath around them, Elena realized something she had never felt before. She was not standing in front of something dangerous. She was standing in front of something powerful that had chosen, for reasons she did not yet understand, to let her remain. The distance between them was no longer measured in feet, but in something far less tangible, something that tightened with every second. The wolf stood there, watching her without retreat and without attack. Elena felt it in the way her breath refused to settle completely, in the quiet pull beneath her ribs that seemed to align itself with the steady rhythm of the creature before her. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, dismissed before she could even speak, her presence something people moved past without a second thought. But this was different. This was deliberate. The wolf took another step forward, closing the space until only a few feet remained between them, and Elena could feel the shift more clearly now, not in the air, but in herself. It was as if something inside her recognized what stood before her long before her mind could understand it. Her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of that awareness. "You should go," she said quietly, though the words did not carry conviction. They felt more like something she was supposed to say rather than something she truly believed. Because if this creature was truly strong enough to stand like this, to hold itself with such controlled power after being so close to fading, then it did not need her anymore. And yet, it had not left. The wolf's gaze did not waver. Those silver eyes remained locked onto hers, steady and unyielding, as if her words had not reached it at all, or perhaps had simply been dismissed. Elena swallowed, a faint crease forming between her brows as she searched for something else to say, something that would make sense of what was happening. But nothing came, because nothing about this felt ordinary. The warmth in her chest pulsed again, stronger now, spreading outward in a slow, steady wave that made her draw in a sharper breath. It was not painful. It was not overwhelming. But it was impossible to ignore. It felt like a thread, invisible but present, stretching between her and the creature before her, connecting them in a way she had no language for. Her hand lifted slightly before she could stop herself, instinct guiding her more than thought, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. This was the point where she should pull back. This was the moment where sense should return, where she should remember everything she had been taught about her place, about the dangers of stepping beyond it. But those lessons felt distant now, muted beneath something far more immediate. Elena stepped forward instead. Just one step, small but intentional, closing the last bit of distance between them until she stood within reach again. Her heart beat louder in her chest, not from panic, but from anticipation she did not fully understand. The wolf did not move away. It did not lower its head or shift its stance in warning. It simply watched her, that same steady awareness in its gaze, as if it had been expecting this. Elena exhaled slowly, steadying herself, and lifted her hand the rest of the way, her fingers brushing once more against the thick fur at its shoulder. The warmth surged instantly, stronger than before, and this time it did not stop at her wrist. It traveled upward, spreading through her arm and into her chest, settling there like something that had finally found where it belonged. Her eyes widened slightly, her breath catching as the sensation deepened, not just warmth now, but something layered beneath it. Recognition, not hers alone. The wolf inhaled, deep and steady, and as it exhaled, Elena felt that invisible thread tighten, becoming clearer, more defined, as if something unspoken had just been acknowledged between them. She did not understand it, but she felt it, and for the first time, she did not try to pull away from it. Her fingers remained where they were, her touch steady now, no longer tentative, as she met the wolf's gaze again. "You are not alone anymore," she said softly, the words slipping free without thought, shaped more by what she felt than what she intended to say. The moment the words left her, something shifted, not in the wolf's posture, not in the clearing around them, but in the quiet space between her heartbeat and her breath. It deepened, settled, as if something unseen had taken hold. The wolf's eyes did not soften, but they changed again, that subtle shift she was beginning to recognize, as though something behind them had responded to her voice, to her presence, to her. Elena's chest rose and fell. Slowly, her pulse steadying into a rhythm that no longer felt entirely her own. She did not know what this meant. She did not know what would happen next. But standing there, within arm's reach of something that could have easily turned away, or worse, she understood one thing with quiet certainty. Whatever connection had begun in this clearing, it was not something that would simply fade when she walked away. And deep down, in a place she had never trusted before, she knew she did not want it to. The moment lingered longer than it should have, stretching between them like something fragile and unspoken, until a distant sound broke through the stillness. Elena heard it before she fully registered what it was, a faint disturbance carried through the trees, subtle but out of place. Voices, far enough that the words were unclear, but close enough that the tone carried. Sharp, searching. Her body reacted instantly, the quiet steadiness she had found unraveling just enough to let instinct take hold. She turned her head slightly, listening, her breath slowing as she focused on the direction of the sound. It was coming from the outer edge of the territory, not far from where she stood now. That meant they were close. Too close. Her fingers tensed against the wolf's fur before she pulled her hand back, the warmth lingering even as contact broke. The clearing no longer felt isolated. It felt exposed. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice low but firm, shaped more by certainty than fear. She did not need to see them to know who it was. Patrol. They always moved along this boundary, especially after a storm, checking for anything that did not belong. And this definitely did not belong. Elena's gaze flickered back to the wolf, her chest tightening as the reality of the situation settled in. If they found him here, they would not hesitate. Not because they were cruel, but because they were conditioned to respond to anything unfamiliar with caution, with control, with force if necessary. They would see size, strength, unknown origin, and they would act. The wolf did not move immediately. It stood where it was, its posture unchanged, its gaze still fixed on her as if the distant voices meant nothing, as if it did not recognize the threat in the same way she did. Or worse, as if it simply did not care. Elena stepped closer again without thinking, her voice lowering further as urgency threaded through it. "You cannot stay here," she said, the words quicker now, shaped by something sharper beneath the surface. "If they see you, they will not understand." Her heart beat faster, not from panic, but from the weight of what she knew she had to do. This was the moment where everything shifted from instinct to choice. She could step back. She could walk away, leave the wolf to whatever came next, and no one would blame her. That was what was expected. That was what someone like her was supposed to do. But her feet did not move in that direction. They moved forward. Elena reached out again, not with hesitation this time, but with intent, her hand resting briefly against the wolf's shoulder as she met its gaze. "Come with me," she said quietly. Not a command, not a plea, something in between, something steady. The wolf's ears flicked once more, reacting not to the distant voices now, but to her. The silver of its eyes seemed to sharpen, focusing on her in a way that made the space between them feel smaller again, more defined. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The forest held its breath. Elena felt it in the way the air seemed to pause, in the way her own pulse echoed just a little louder in her ears. Then the wolf moved. Not away, not forward in dominance, but in alignment. It stepped to the side, closer to her, its massive form adjusting with quiet precision as if it had made a decision of its own. Elena exhaled slowly, a small release of tension she had not realized she was holding. She turned, glancing once more toward the direction of the voices, now slightly louder, closer than before. There was no more time. Without another word, she stepped toward the narrow path that led deeper into the trees, one she knew well enough to navigate even in low light. It wound away from the patrol routes, cutting through denser parts of the forest where fewer wolves ventured unless they had reason. It was not safe in the way the pack defined safety, but it was hidden. Elena moved quickly now, not running, but with purpose, her steps sure despite the uneven ground. Behind her, she heard it, the soft, controlled sound of something large moving in tandem with her pace. Not chasing, not forcing, following. The awareness of it sent a quiet shiver through her, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had just chosen. She was leading something powerful away from her pack. She was stepping beyond the line that had defined her place for as long as she could remember. And yet, as she moved deeper into the trees, the warmth in her chest remained steady, grounding her with every step. The voices behind them grew faint, fading into the distance as the forest closed in around her path. Elena did not look back. She did not need to, because she could feel it. The presence just behind her, steady and undeniable. And for the first time since she heard those distant voices, her breath began to even out again, not because the danger had passed, but because she was no longer facing it alone. The forest closed around them the deeper they went, the trees growing taller, older, their branches weaving together to block out what little light remained from the fading sky. Elena kept moving, her steps careful but unbroken, her breath measured as she followed a path only she seemed to recognize. The ground here was uneven, roots pushing through the soil like quiet obstacles, but she did not stumble. She knew this place, not because she belonged to it, but because it was one of the few places where no one else wanted to be, that had always made it safer for her. Behind her, the presence remained constant. Not loud, not intrusive, just there. Every step she took was matched, not in perfect rhythm, but in quiet awareness. She did not need to turn to know the wolf was still following. She could feel it in the steady pull in her chest, in the way the air shifted ever so slightly with each movement behind her. After several minutes, she slowed, her pace easing as the trees thinned just enough to reveal a small break in the forest ahead. It was not a clearing like the one before, not open or exposed, but a tucked-away space, bordered by thick trunks and low-hanging branches. A place that felt hidden rather than empty. Elena stepped into it first, her eyes scanning the area out of habit, checking for anything out of place. There was nothing, just the quiet hum of the forest settling into night. She exhaled slowly and turned. The wolf emerged from the shadows a moment later, its large form moving into the space with the same controlled presence it had carried since waking. Even here, where the forest pressed close on all sides, it did not seem confined. If anything, it made the space feel smaller simply by existing within it. Elena studied it for a moment, her gaze softer now, less guarded, though the awareness had not left her. "This is as far as I can take you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the lingering tension in her chest. It was not entirely true. She could go further. She knew paths deeper still, places even more isolated. But those places were not meant for anything but survival. And she was not sure what this creature needed beyond what she had already given. The wolf stopped a few feet from her, its silver eyes fixed on her once more. The intensity of that gaze had not lessened with time. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something quieter but more certain. Elena felt it again, that subtle shift inside her, that pull that seemed to respond to the way it looked at her, as if something within her recognized the weight of that attention. She folded her arms lightly, not out of defense, but to steady herself, her fingers pressing into the fabric of her sleeves as she considered what to say next. "You should rest," she added after a moment, glancing briefly at its posture, at the strength it now held so easily. It no longer looked like something that had been struggling to survive. It looked composed, whole, but even strength had limits. She knew that better than most. The wolf tilted its head slightly, a small, deliberate motion that made her breath catch for just a second. It was not the movement itself that unsettled her. It was the awareness behind it. The way it felt less like instinct and more like understanding. Elena's lips parted slightly, but no. Words came this time. Because she did not know what to say to something that seemed to be listening in a way she had never experienced before. The silence stretched again, but it was different now. Not tense, not uncertain. It felt grounded, as if whatever had begun between them in that first clearing had followed them here and settled into place. A faint breeze moved through the space, brushing against her skin, carrying with it the familiar scent of the forest. But beneath it, there was something else now. Subtle, hard to define. Something that felt tied to the presence in front of her. Elena noticed it only because it lingered, because it did not fade as quickly as everything else. She shifted her weight slightly, her eyes lowering for a brief moment before lifting again to meet the wolf's gaze. "I cannot stay," she said, more quietly now, the words carrying a different kind of weight. Not just a statement, but a boundary, a reminder. Because no matter what had happened here, no matter what she felt in that quiet space between them, her world still existed beyond this place, and it would not accept what stood in front of her. The wolf did not move. It did not step forward or turn away. It simply watched her, that same steady presence holding, as if waiting for something she had not yet given. Elena felt the pull again, stronger now, threading through her chest in a way that made her pause. For a moment, she did not move, did not speak. She simply stood there, caught between what she knew and what she felt. Then, slowly, she stepped back. Just one step, creating space, testing something she could not name. The distance between them returned, small but noticeable. The air shifted with it. And yet, the connection did not break. It remained, quiet and persistent, as if distance meant nothing at all. Elena drew in a slow breath, steadying herself once more, her gaze lingering on the wolf for just a second longer than necessary. Then she turned. Not abruptly, not in fear, but with quiet intention. She took a step toward the edge of the hidden space, her body already preparing to return to the world she knew. And even as she moved away, she could still feel it. That presence, that awareness, that something that had chosen to follow her once already. And for reasons she could not yet explain, she had the distinct feeling that this would not be the last time. Elena had only taken 3 steps when the feeling changed. It was subtle at first, a quiet shift beneath her ribs, like the steady thread that had been connecting her to the wolf suddenly tightening, pulling just enough to make her stop mid-step. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she simply stood there, her back turned, her body caught between motion and stillness. She had meant to leave. That had been the plan. Simple, clean. Walk away before this became something she could not explain, something she could not hide. But the forest did not feel the same anymore. The air carried a different weight now, something quieter but heavier, as if the space behind her was no longer just a place she had passed through, but something that was still watching, still waiting. Elena slowly turned her head, her gaze shifting back over her shoulder. The wolf had not moved. It stood exactly where she had left it, framed by shadow and soft light, its silver eyes still fixed on her with that same unwavering focus. It had not followed this time. It had not closed the distance like before. It had stayed. And somehow, that made the pull stronger. Elena frowned slightly, confusion flickering across her expression as she turned fully to face it again. Her fingers curled faintly at her sides, the fabric of her sleeves pressing into her palms as she tried to steady the quiet tension building in her chest. "Why are you not leaving?" she asked softly, the question slipping free before she could stop it. It was not a demand. It was not even frustration. It was something closer to uncertainty, because nothing about this made sense. A creature like this, something powerful enough to command the space around it without effort, should not hesitate. It should not linger. It should not look at her as if she mattered in any way beyond the moment she had touched it. But it was still here, still watching, still choosing not to turn away. The wolf's ears shifted slightly at the sound of her voice, but its body remained still, grounded, as if it had rooted itself into the very earth beneath it. Elena exhaled slowly, her breath unsteady now, not from fear, but from the growing realization that this was no longer something she could simply walk away from. The warmth in her chest pulsed again, stronger this time, spreading outward in a way that made her shoulders tense slightly as she tried to contain it. It was no longer just a faint connection. It felt anchored, like something had settled into place and refused to loosen its hold. Her gaze dropped briefly to the ground between them, her thoughts racing in quiet, controlled circles as she searched for something familiar to hold on to. But there was nothing familiar here, not in the way the wolf watched her, not in the way her body responded to it, not in the way the forest itself seemed to have shifted to accommodate whatever this was. Elena lifted her head again, her eyes finding his once more, and this time, she did not try to step away. She did not try to create distance. Instead, she took a slow step forward, closing the space she had just created. Her movement was cautious, but it was not hesitant. It carried a quiet resolve, shaped by something deeper than logic. The wolf did not react with surprise. It did not retreat. It simply remained where it was, that same steady awareness holding as if it had expected her to return. Elena stopped just a few feet away, her breath steadying as she studied it again, more carefully now, as if searching for something she had missed. "You felt it too," she said softly, the words forming without effort, drawn from the certainty settling in her chest. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. Because whatever this connection was, it was not one-sided. She could feel that now. The wolf inhaled slowly, its chest rising with quiet strength, and as it exhaled, Elena felt it again. That invisible thread tightening, aligning, as if her words had found their mark. Her heart skipped once, a subtle but undeniable reaction that made her breath hitch just slightly. This was not something she had imagined. This was real, and it was responding to her. Elena's hand lifted again, almost instinctively, her fingers hovering in the space between them as she hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then she stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its body, steady and grounding. Her fingertips brushed against its fur once more, and this time, the warmth that followed was immediate and unmistakable. It spread through her like a quiet surge, not overwhelming, but certain, settling deep within her chest in a way that made everything else fall silent for a moment. Her eyes softened, just slightly, as she met his gaze again, her voice quieter now, but steadier than before. "Then you know," she whispered. And in that quiet, suspended space, with the forest holding its breath around them, Elena understood something she could no longer ignore. This was not an accident. This was not just kindness or chance. Whatever had begun between them had chosen to remain. And now, it was asking something of her in return. Elena did not pull her hand away this time. The warmth had settled too deeply, too completely, as if it had found something within her that had been waiting without her ever knowing it. It was no longer just a sensation. It felt like a presence, quiet but steady, moving in rhythm with her breath, aligning with something beyond her control. Her fingers remained against the wolf's fur, her touch no longer tentative, no longer uncertain, as she stood there in the stillness, caught in something she could not yet name. The forest around them seemed to fade again, the distant sounds softening into the background as the space between them became the only thing that mattered. Elena's chest rose slowly as she drew in a breath, her gaze fixed on those silver eyes that had not once turned away from her. There was no confusion in them, no hesitation, only awareness. And something else now, something deeper. She felt it in the way the connection between them tightened again, not sharp or overwhelming, but undeniable. It was responding to her presence, to her choice to remain. Elena swallowed, her throat tightening slightly as a thought formed, quiet but persistent. This was not something that had just happened. This was something that had been waiting for her. The realization settled slowly, not as a shock, but as a weight that made her breath hitch just slightly. She had spent her entire life believing she was insignificant, that whatever she carried was small, forgettable, easily overlooked. But standing here now, with something powerful enough to command the forest itself choosing to remain connected to her, that belief felt distant, unsteady, as if it no longer held the same truth it once did. The wolf shifted again, but this time the movement was different. Slower, more deliberate, its head lowered just slightly, not in weakness, but in something that felt closer to acknowledgement. Elena's eyes widened a fraction, her breath catching as the shift in posture sent a ripple through that invisible thread between them. It was not submission. It was not dominance. It was something far more precise. Recognition. Her hand trembled faintly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that gesture meant. Because she understood it, even if she could not explain how. This was not just a creature she had helped. This was something that had seen her, truly seen her, and chosen to respond. Elena's lips parted slightly, her voice softer now, almost a whisper shaped by something deeper than sound. Who are you? The question lingered in the space between them, not demanding, but searching. Because she needed to understand. Needed something to ground what was happening in something real, something she could hold on to. The wolf's gaze did not waver, but something within it shifted again, that same subtle change she had begun to recognize, as if her words had reached something beneath the surface. The air seemed to grow heavier for a moment, the silence stretching in a way that made her pulse echo louder in her ears. Then, slowly, the wolf took a step closer. Close enough that there was no distance left to bridge. Elena did not move. Could not. Her body had gone still, her breath shallow as she watched, as she felt the connection between them draw tighter, stronger, until it was no longer something she could ignore or question. It was simply there. The wolf lowered its head slightly more, bringing its gaze level with hers, the silver in its eyes catching what little light remained and holding it steady. Elena felt it then. Not just warmth. Not just presence, something deeper, a shift that moved through her chest and settled into her bones, as if something unseen had just aligned itself with her completely. Her heart skipped once, then steadied, falling into a rhythm that no longer felt entirely her own. She exhaled softly, her hand still resting against him, her voice barely audible now as the truth settled in around her. This is not just chance. The words were not a question. They were a realization. Because whatever this was, it had weight. It had intention, and it had chosen her. The wolf did not speak. It did not need to. Because in that moment, Elena understood something with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This connection was not something that could be undone by distance or time. It was not something she could walk away from and leave behind in the forest. It had already crossed that line. It had already become part of her. And standing there, within reach of something she had once believed belonged to a world far beyond her own, she realized that whatever came next would not just change her path. It would change who she was entirely. The shift began so subtly that Elena almost missed it. It was not in the wolf's movement, not in the way it stood before her, steady and composed, but in the air itself. The quiet space around them seemed to tighten, as if something unseen had drawn closer, pressing in without sound or warning. Her breath slowed instinctively, her body reacting before her thoughts could catch up, every sense sharpening at once. The warmth in her chest pulsed again, stronger than before, no longer just a steady presence, but something that demanded attention. It spread outward, deeper this time, threading through her like something that had always belonged there, waiting to be recognized. Elena's fingers tensed slightly against the wolf's fur, her eyes fixed on his as the change continued to build. The silver in his gaze did not waver, but there was something behind it now, something shifting, something rising. She felt it before she saw it, that same quiet awareness that had guided her from the beginning, now growing sharper, clearer, as if it was trying to prepare her for what was about to happen. Her breath caught, her chest tightening as the connection between them surged, no longer a thread but something stronger, something that held with undeniable force. The wolf exhaled slowly, and with that single breath, everything changed. The air seemed to ripple, not violently, but with a quiet, undeniable shift that made Elena take an involuntary step back. Her hand slipped from his fur as the warmth surged through her all at once, flooding her senses in a way that made her heart race. She did not look away. She could not, because right in front of her, the form she had come to recognize began to change. Not abruptly, not in a way that startled or frightened, but in a way that felt inevitable. The massive frame of the wolf seemed to blur at the edges, its outlines softening as if it no longer held to a single shape. Elena's breath came shallow now, her body caught between stillness and instinct as she watched, her mind struggling to keep pace with what her eyes were seeing. The silver gaze never left hers, even as everything else shifted around it, anchoring her in place. The presence did not lessen. If anything, it grew stronger, more defined, as though the transformation was not diminishing it, but revealing it. Elena's fingers curled at her sides, grounding herself as the warmth in her chest flared again, not painful, but intense, like something aligning perfectly into place. She felt it settle deeper within her, anchoring her to the moment, to him, to whatever this was becoming. And then, just as gradually as it had begun, the shift stilled. The air settled. The forest exhaled. Elena blinked once, her breath catching as her gaze adjusted, as her mind struggled to reconcile what stood before her now with what had been there moments before. The presence had not changed. Not truly. It was still vast, still steady, still undeniably powerful. But the form, the space where the wolf had stood was no longer occupied by fur and towering frame alone. Instead, there was a man. Tall. Still. His posture carried the same quiet control, the same effortless strength that had filled the clearing before, but now it was unmistakably human. His hair was dark, falling loosely around his face, and his features were sharp in a way that felt both precise and unyielding. But it was his eyes that held her. Silver. Unchanged. Watching her with the same unwavering focus that had never once left her since the moment they had met. Elena's breath left her in a slow, unsteady exhale, her heart pounding now, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was seeing, what she was finally understanding. This was not just a wolf. This was not just something powerful within the forest. This was something far more. The connection between them did not break. It did not weaken. If anything, it grew clearer, more defined, as if the truth of him had only strengthened what already existed. Elena's voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper, shaped by disbelief and something deeper she could not yet name. You. She could not finish the thought, because there were no words for this. The man before her did not move immediately. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on her, as if giving her the space to understand, to process, to accept what had been revealed. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Elena felt the truth settle into her with undeniable clarity. She had not just saved a wolf. She had awakened something far more powerful. And whatever stood before her now had been watching her from the very beginning, waiting for this moment to reveal itself. Elena could not move at first. The forest seemed to hold her in place, every sound muted, every detail sharpened, as if the world itself had narrowed down to the space between her and the man standing before her. Her breath came slow and uneven, her chest rising and falling with the effort of grounding herself in something real, something familiar. But there was nothing familiar about this. Not the way he stood, still and composed as if the shift from one form to another had cost him nothing. Not the way his presence filled the clearing without force, without effort, as though the space had always belonged to him. And certainly not the way his eyes remained locked on hers, steady and unyielding, holding her in place without a single word spoken. The connection between them had not lessened. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something clearer now that there was no barrier of form between them. Elena felt it in the way her heartbeat refused to settle into its usual rhythm, in the way her thoughts struggled to move past the simple truth standing in front of her. This was him. This was what she had been feeling all along. Not just power, not just presence, but something far more deliberate. Something that had chosen to reveal itself only when it was ready. Her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, the ghost of warmth still lingering where she had touched him, as if her body had not yet accepted the distance between them. She swallowed, her throat dry as she forced herself to speak, though her voice came softer than she intended. You are not just a wolf. The words felt insufficient the moment they left her lips, too small to hold the weight of what she now understood. The man did not respond immediately. He did not rush to explain or clarify. Instead, he simply watched her, his gaze unwavering, as if allowing her to come to that realization on her own had been part of the process. The silence stretched, but it did not feel empty. It felt intentional, as though every second was being measured, every reaction observed. Elena drew in a slow breath, her shoulders lifting slightly before settling again, her mind racing to catch up with everything that had happened. The patrol, the forest, the connection. It all shifted now under the light of this new truth. This was not a coincidence. This was not just an encounter with something rare or powerful. This was something that carried meaning far beyond what she had first believed. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice steadier this time, though the question carried more weight now, more urgency. Because she was no longer asking about a creature in the woods. She was asking about the man standing in front of her. The man whose presence felt like it belonged to something far greater than this place. For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze softened, not in weakness, but in focus, as if her question had reached something deeper beneath the surface. Then, finally, he moved. It was subtle, a shift in posture, a slight tilt of his head, but it carried the same controlled precision she had seen in his other form. He took a step forward, closing what little distance remained between them until the space felt charged again, alive with that same quiet intensity that had never truly left. Elena's breath caught, but she did not step back. She could not, because whatever this was, whatever he was, he had already crossed the boundary that mattered most. He had reached her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying a depth that seemed to settle into the air itself rather than pass through it. Lucian Thornvale. The name landed between them with a quiet finality, as if it carried its own weight, its own history, its own authority. Elena's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching as recognition flickered across her expression. She had heard that name before, not in stories meant to comfort, but in whispers, in warnings, in the kind of quiet conversations that carried more truth than anyone was willing to admit aloud. The Alpha King, the most powerful name across territories that stretched far beyond the boundaries of her small, overlooked life. And he was standing here, in front of her, not as a distant figure of power, but as something real, something present, something that had looked at her, chosen her, and remained. Elena's pulse quickened, the weight of that realization settling into her chest as she searched his face, as if trying to reconcile the man before her with the name she had just heard. It did not feel like a mistake. It did not feel like something she could deny, because everything about him aligned with what she had felt from the very beginning. The power, the presence, the certainty. Her voice, when it came again, was quieter now, but no less steady. "You stayed." It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. Because he could have left. At any moment, from the very beginning, he could have turned away, disappeared into the forest, returned to whatever world he truly belonged to. But he had not. He had remained. Lucian did not look away. His gaze held hers with the same unwavering focus. And for a moment, the silence returned, thick and deliberate. Then, slowly, he spoke again. "You call me back." The words were simple, but they carried a depth that settled into her with quiet certainty. Elena felt it in the way the connection between them responded, tightening slightly, as if confirming what he had said. Her breath caught, her chest tightening as the meaning behind those words unfolded. This had not just been chance. It had not just been her choice. It had been something shared, something that had drawn them together in a way neither of them could ignore. And standing there, facing the Alpha King himself, Elena realized that whatever had begun in that clearing was no longer something she could question or deny. It was something that had already changed the course of her life. The words settled between them with a weight that did not fade. "You call me back." Elena felt them echo through her chest, not as sound, but as something deeper, something that aligned with the steady pulse she had been feeling since the moment she touched him. Her breath slowed, her thoughts quieting as she stood there, facing him not just as a stranger anymore, but as something connected, something chosen in a way she could no longer deny. The forest around them seemed to shift again, not physically, but in presence, as if the space itself had accepted what had been spoken. Elena's fingers curled lightly at her sides, grounding herself as she searched his face, as if trying to find something human in the vastness she felt from him. But what she found instead was steadiness, control, and something else she had not expected: restraint. He had not moved closer again. He had not reached for her, had not closed the distance the way he easily could have. He simply stood there, watching her, allowing her space, as though the choice to step forward still belonged to her. That realization settled quietly into her thoughts, soft but undeniable. He was not forcing this. Whatever this connection was, it was not something he was taking. It was something he was allowing her to meet. Elena exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing just slightly as that understanding took hold. She had spent so long believing that power always came with pressure, with control, with expectation. But this felt different. It felt offered. Her gaze dropped briefly to the space between them, her thoughts shifting, rearranging, as she tried to make sense of what this meant beyond the moment. Because this was not just about her anymore. Not just about what she felt. This was about who he was. Lucian Thornvale, the Alpha King, a name that carried weight across lands she had never even seen. A presence that commanded loyalty, fear, respect. And he was standing here, hidden in a quiet pocket of forest, speaking to her as if none of that distance existed. Elena lifted her head again, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that had not been there before. "If they find you here," she began, her voice quieter now, but firm. The thought of the patrol returned, not as immediate danger, but as a reminder of the world waiting just beyond this moment. "They will not understand who you are." Her words were careful, shaped by concern rather than fear. Because she understood something now that she had not before. It was not just him that was at risk. It was what his presence here would mean. The balance it could shift. The questions it would raise. Lucian's gaze did not falter, but there was a subtle change in it. Something that acknowledged her words without dismissing them. He took a slow breath, his posture remaining relaxed, but there was a quiet awareness in the way he stood, as if he had already considered every possibility she was now voicing. "They are not meant to," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying the same quiet authority that seemed to settle into everything around him. Elena's brow furrowed slightly, her mind catching on the meaning behind his words. Not meant to. That was not avoidance. That was intention. He had not been discovered by accident. He had been hidden by choice. Her gaze sharpened slightly, curiosity threading through the lingering tension as she studied him more closely. "Then why stay?" she asked, the question slipping free before she could hold it back. It was not defiance. It was not challenge. It was something simpler. Honest. Because if everything about him spoke of control and purpose, then his presence here had meaning. And she needed to understand it. Lucian did not answer immediately. The silence that followed was not empty, but deliberate, as if he was choosing his words with the same precision he seemed to carry in every movement. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Not enough to overwhelm. Not enough to take away her space. Just enough to shift the distance again, to bring them into that quiet awareness that had defined every moment between them. Elena's breath caught slightly, but she did not step back. The connection between them responded instantly, tightening in a way that felt familiar now, grounding rather than overwhelming. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less certain. "Because you did not walk away." The words landed gently, but their meaning carried weight far beyond their simplicity. Elena felt it in the way her chest tightened, in the way that quiet thread between them pulsed in response, as if confirming what he had said. This was not just about what he was. It was about what she had done, the choice she had made when no one was watching, the moment she had stepped forward instead of turning away. Her breath slowed, her thoughts settling as the truth of it unfolded. This had never been one-sided. Not from the beginning. Not from the moment she first reached out her hand. She had changed something, not just in him, but in the path that had brought him here. Elena's gaze softened slightly, her shoulders easing as she stood there, no longer caught between uncertainty and instinct, but grounded in something clearer. Something she could not fully explain, but could no longer ignore. "Then what happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice steady, shaped by acceptance more than doubt. Because whatever this was, whatever had begun here, it was no longer something that belonged only to the forest or the moment. It was something that would follow them both beyond it. And for the first time, she was not afraid to ask where it might lead. The question lingered in the air between them, quiet but unyielding, as if the forest itself had paused to hear the answer. What happens now? Elena felt it settle into her chest, not as uncertainty, but as something heavier, something that carried the weight of everything that had already changed. Because there was no returning from this. Not to the quiet life she had known. Not to the place where she had been invisible, overlooked, untouched by anything beyond survival. That path had already shifted the moment she chose not to walk away. Lucian did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on hers, steady and unwavering. But there was something deeper in it now, something that felt less like observation and more like decision. The silence stretched, but it did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, as if what came next was not something to be rushed. Elena's breath slowed, her shoulders easing slightly as she held his gaze, no longer shrinking from it, no longer questioning her place in it. Because for the first time, she understood that she had won. Not given, not assigned, chosen. The realization grounded her in a way she had never felt before. Lucian took a step forward, closing the distance fully now, until there was no space left between them. Elena felt it immediately, that quiet surge of warmth in her chest deepening, expanding, as if something within her was responding to his presence in a way that had already become familiar. But this time, it did not stop there. It settled, anchored, as if whatever connection had formed between them had reached its final shape. Her breath caught softly, her heart steady but full, as she looked up at him, truly seeing him now not just as something powerful, but as someone standing in front of her, present, real, and undeniably connected to her in a way she could no longer deny. Lucian's hand lifted slowly, not sudden, not forceful, but with the same measured control he carried in everything he did. He paused for just a moment, as if giving her the space to step back if she wished, as if the choice still belonged to her. Elena did not move. She did not pull away. Her breath steadied, her shoulders relaxing as she allowed the moment to unfold, not out of surrender, but out of certainty. His hand closed gently around hers. The contact was immediate. The warmth that followed was no longer a quiet pulse or a fleeting sensation. It was complete. It moved through her like something that had finally found where it belonged, settling deep within her chest with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Elena's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching as the connection between them solidified, no longer something forming, but something whole. She felt it in the way her heartbeat aligned with something stronger, something steadier, something that did not belong to her alone anymore. Lucian's gaze did not waver as he looked at her, his voice low, steady, carrying a quiet authority that did not demand, but declared, "You stand between worlds now." The words settled into her, not as a warning, but as truth. Elena felt it immediately, the weight of what he meant, the understanding that what had begun here would not remain hidden, would not remain contained within the quiet space of the forest. It would follow her. It would change how she was seen, how she moved, how she existed within the world she had always known. But for the first time, that thought did not fill her with fear. It filled her with something else, something steadier, something stronger, because she was not standing there alone anymore. Lucian's grip on her hand tightened just slightly, not enough to restrain, but enough to anchor, to remind. And you will not stand there alone. Elena's breath softened, her shoulders easing as the final piece settled into place. She looked at him, really looked, not just at the power he carried, not just at the name he held, but at the choice he had made. To stay, to reveal himself, to stand here, with her. The forest seemed to exhale around them, the quiet returning not as emptiness, but as something complete, something that had witnessed what had just been set into motion. Elena's fingers tightened slightly around his, her voice quiet but steady as she answered, not with doubt, but with acceptance. "Then I will not walk away." The words did not feel like a promise. They felt like something already true. Lucian's gaze softened just slightly, not in weakness, but in recognition, as if her answer had confirmed something he had already known. He stepped closer, the space between them disappearing completely now, and for a moment, the world beyond them ceased to exist. No patrol, no pack, no boundaries, just the quiet certainty of what had been chosen. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of the night, the forest settling back into its rhythm as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Elena stood there, her hand still in his, her heart steady, her thoughts clear in a way they had never been before. She had stepped into something she could not fully see, something she could not yet understand. But she was no longer afraid of it. Because whatever waited beyond this moment, whatever path had been set into motion, she would not be walking it alone. And somewhere deep within her, in that quiet place that had once been filled with doubt and silence, something stronger had taken root. Not just connection, not just destiny, but choice. And for the first time, it was hers.